And joining us now to speak more about Greenblatt's visit to the Middle East and that electricity crisis in Gaza is Omar Badar. He is the Deputy Director of the Arab American Institute. That is a non-profit focused on engaging Arab Americans in political and civic life in the U.S. And also joining us here in studio is David Efyun. He is the Editor-in-Chief of the Allgemeine, a Jewish newspaper here in the U.S. Thank you both for joining us. And Omar, I'd like to start with you. What are the Palestinian expectations from this visit by Greenblatt?
I mean, it's hard to expect much at this point. If you look at the details, I mean, you have Greenblatt, he's going to meet with the Trump administration's ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, who is by any measure an extremist on the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You remember he called President Obama an anti-Semite because of Obama's efforts to pursue an even-handed approach to Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking. He also refers to mainstream centrist Jewish organizations in the U.S. like J Street as capos, basically calls them Nazi collaborators for the crime of pushing for an even-handed approach. And then you have Jared Kushner, the envoy to peace. You have Jared Kushner, also the envoy to peace over there, who's tied to financially to backing of settlements. So with appointments like these, the Trump administration has already set the tone to its approach to peacemaking. They're not really dealing with this as an even-handed approach. What they're really there for is to try to deliver the Palestinians to Israel's terms, get them to accept whatever crumbs Israel wants to give them and call it a state. And that's just not going to lead to a lasting peace agreement.
To be fair, the ambassador announced those comments about capos during his confirmation hearings. But to the larger point, David, you agree that this is simply crumbs that the Palestinians are going to be left with?
No, I don't think so at all. Your Omar there is pulling up some pieces of history. But I think it's important for everybody to focus on what's happening today. Right now, all of those gentlemen that he mentioned, Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, David Friedman, are representing the United States government, irrespective of their past personal views on matters. And the approach that they've had until now and the conversations that they've had until now have been focused on very substantial policy issues. And those are the discussions that I think are likely to continue. Some of those policy issues are policies that President Abbas would like to move under the carpet, but is having difficulty doing so, including the major issue of payments to terrorists and their families, which was a matter that Donald Trump brought up himself in his meeting with Abbas. It came up again, according to reports, the meeting with Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt, and the Americans so far feel like they've been lied to. So Abbas has a lot of answering to do at this point.
Omar, how about it?
So the first thing to point out when it comes to that is just the sheer hypocrisy of this issue, is that you have literally thousands of Palestinians who get killed on a regular basis by Israeli war crimes and crimes against humanity that are documented and condemned by every major human rights organization in the world. And these Israeli soldiers are celebrated as heroes after they return. Incidentally, we're right now in the 3-year anniversary of the assault on Gaza that killed 1,400 civilians, including 500 children. These people are celebrated as heroes, and nobody's talking about U.S. funding military backing of Israel. I mean, if you talk about where accountability should be had, at least this is a much more straightforward issue where U.S. law supposedly holds to account the U.S., says it is illegal for the U.S. to provide military aid to countries engaged in massive gross human rights violation, which every human rights organization says Israel is. By contrast, the Palestinian Authority issue is much more complex, frankly, because what they do is they provide assistance, compensation to the families of people who are killed in the fight with Israel. They don't make an exception for the families and children of people who engage in terrorism, and there is a legitimate debate that could be had between reasonable people. But to be having this kind of conversation while ignoring entirely the fact that Israeli soldiers engaged in much larger scale atrocities, and nobody talks about the fact that the government still backs them, I think is a bit of a kind of glaring double standard.
Can I interject here for a second? Because this sounds quite egregious, what you're saying, and tell me if I'm hearing this correctly. Are you comparing the soldiers of the Israeli government, the democratically elected Israeli government, with members of internationally recognized terror groups, Hamas in Gaza, and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, who are being paid by the Palestinian Authority, by the formal structures of Palestinian society? To draw this parallel is it's morally corrupt. I can't believe that you're making that comparison, Omar.
If you think it matters the identity and what organization somebody belongs to when they engage in large-scale, massive, and deliberate attacks on civilians, I frankly don't think that it matters whether they belong to an officially recognized terrorist organization or whether they belong to a government. Government terrorism is still
Israeli
terrorism.
government
State terrorism
of
against civilians is still terrorism.
Are you accusing the Israeli government of deliberately targeting civilians? Is Palestinian civilians?
It's not me accusing them. It's Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International who are accusing them. That's absolutely very, very well documented.
I don't think that those are credible claims at all. And if you look at the details of any such claims and such documentation, Israel has been shown time and time again.
What's the counter-argument? Do you think that human rights organizations are collaborating somehow to try to smear Israel? I mean, is that believable?
That's actually a debate for another day. And so we're going to have to leave this here, but I promise David and Omar, we will have you back to discuss that very issue. Omar Badar and David Afyoun, thank you so much. We appreciate it.